I never thought it'd end like this. 20 years. 20 years of my life poured into building something that mattered, or at least I thought it did. My name's Richard Mallory, 55 years old, and up until last Thursday, I was the Senior Vice President of Client Relations at Evermark Industries in Omaha, Nebraska. Evermark wasn't just a company to me, it was the company. I joined back when they were still leasing a 2-story office above a used car lot. I was there for the scrappy years, the merger years, the layoffs and rebounds, the wins that nobody outside the boardroom ever saw. I built our client portfolio from a dozen small accounts to a network spanning Fortune 500 giants. I didn't just work there. I bled there. And yet, I should have seen the cracks earlier. It started small. Subtle shifts. 3 months ago, Derek, the new director of operations, called me old school in a meeting. Said it with a grin, like it was a compliment. Richard's the guy who knows everyone, he said, but we're pivoting to a more digital-first model. I laughed it off at the time. Figured it was just the way younger execs talked. I even told my wife later that night, joking that Derek thought I was a dinosaur. But that grin, looking back, it wasn't admiration. It was a warning. Then came the advisory meetings. Suddenly, I wasn't invited to pitch sessions with new clients. Projects I'd spearheaded for years were quietly reassigned to up-and-comers from Derek's hand-picked team. My calendar, once filled wall-to-wall with strategy sessions and client dinners, started looking empty. I told myself it was a phase. That after 2 decades of loyalty, of pulling 12-hour days, of being the guy who picked up the phone at midnight to talk down a panicking client, surely they weren't phasing me out, right? But the signs were there. I just didn't want to believe them. It wasn't one moment that broke me. It was death by 1,000 cuts. 2 weeks after Derek's old-school comment, I noticed he stopped copying me on emails. Client updates that used to land in my inbox were going to others. One morning, I opened my laptop and found that 3 of my key accounts had been reassigned for diversification. When I walked into his office to ask, he leaned back in his chair, smiled that same empty smile, and said, "Richard, we're just spreading leadership opportunities around. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." I'd given this company more than half my life, and he thought he could pat me on the head like a loyal dog and send me on my way. But I still didn't see it. I kept showing up early, staying late, offering mentorship to his protégés even when they barely disguised their eye rolls. I was clinging to something that wasn't mine anymore, like a man gripping the rail of a sinking ship, telling himself the water wasn't really rising. Then last Thursday came. Derek called me into the conference room. The moment I stepped inside and saw Vanessa from HR already sitting there, her face carefully neutral, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. He didn't waste time. "Richard, we're restructuring. We're eliminating your position, effective immediately. HR will go over the details." That was it. 20 years boiled down to 3 sentences. Vanessa slid a folder across the table. Derek stood up, already halfway out the door, like he'd checked a box on his to-do list. I sat there, staring at that folder, numb. I couldn't even feel the anger yet, just this dull, hollow ache, like I'd been quietly erased. I didn't pack up right away. I sat there in that conference room for what must have been an hour, watching the folder on the table like it might suddenly change its contents. Vanessa eventually cleared her throat, offered a rehearsed apology, and left me alone with my thoughts. I walked back to my office, or what used to be mine. My name was still on the door, though I wondered how long that would last. Inside, it felt smaller than I remembered, as if the walls had closed in while I wasn't looking. I started boxing up my things. The framed photo of me shaking hands with the CEO after landing the Stalworth contract. The client awards. The cufflinks my wife gave me on my 10th work anniversary. One by one, pieces of a life I'd built, reduced to trinkets shoved in a cardboard box. And then I saw it. On my desk was a memo. A memo I hadn't seen before. It was from Derek, dated 2 weeks prior. Effective immediately, all client transition plans should be routed through Jason Kelly. Jason, 28 years old. Fresh MBA. The kid who once asked me how to spell liaison in an email. He was already stepping into my role before they even told me. They didn't just let me go. They replaced me before I was gone. I sank into my chair, the weight of it all pressing down. This wasn't just losing a job. It was losing an identity, a purpose. The company I helped build had been moving on without me for months. I'd just been too loyal, too hopeful, too stubborn to see it. I stared out the window, watching cars crawl along Dodge Street, wondering how many of those drivers had felt this same quiet humiliation, this ache that no severance check could fix. I left the office without fanfare. No goodbye party, no handshake send-off. Just me, a box of 20 years crammed into the back seat of my Camry, and a silence that felt heavier than any words. I drove aimlessly for a while, past the old brick warehouse where I'd signed my first big client, past the country club where we'd hosted that disastrous corporate retreat. Every corner of Omaha seemed to carry a ghost of my career. Eventually, I parked at Elmwood Park, under the same tree where I used to bring my daughter for ice cream on Saturdays. I sat there, watching joggers and dog walkers pass by, feeling both invisible and painfully exposed. Then my phone buzzed. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe the screen. "Mr. Mallory?" the voice said. "This is Cynthia from Allied Ventures." Allied Ventures, one of the biggest accounts I'd ever landed, a client I'd personally courted for nearly a year before they signed. I wasn't expecting your call," I said, startled. She hesitated. "Neither was I. But I wanted to let you know. Derek sent out a transition memo yesterday. He's assigning Jason as our new point of contact." I closed my eyes. "Of course he is." Cynthia's voice lowered. "I'm not comfortable with this. We signed with Evermark because of you, Richard. Not Jason. Not Derek. You." For a second, I didn't know what to say. I'd spent the entire day feeling disposable, and now here was a voice on the other end of the line, telling me I wasn't. "I appreciate that more than you know," I finally managed. She hesitated again. "If you ever decide to go independent, call me. I'm serious. We'd rather work with you directly than be handed off to someone we don't trust." I sat there, staring out at the park, her words settling over me like a warm tide. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. I sat there in the park long after the call ended, replaying Cynthia's words over and over in my mind. "If you ever decide to go independent, call me." Independent. The word felt foreign, almost reckless. I'd been corporate my whole life. My name wasn't on a door. My name wasn't on a building. I'd always been part of something bigger, even if that bigger had just shown me how small I really was. And yet, the idea wouldn't leave me alone. When I got home that night, my wife, Claire, was waiting in the kitchen. She took one look at my face and didn't ask what happened, just handed me a beer and pulled out a chair. "Sit," she said softly. I told her everything. Every brutal detail. Derek's smugness. The memo. Jason stepping into my shoes before they'd even been taken off. Cynthia's call. She listened quietly, her hands folded on the table. When I finally finished, she reached across and took my hand. "You know what I'm going to say?" she said gently. I sighed. "Yeah, do it." I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who'd stood by me through layoffs and promotions, through 18-hour days and missed anniversaries. "You're not done, Richard," she continued. "They're done with you. But you've still got more in you." I stared at the table for a long time. Then I nodded. "Okay." And with that single word, something shifted inside me. The man who'd walked out of Evermark that afternoon was gone. In his place stood someone new. Not a corporate man. A builder. The next morning felt different. Not easier. Not lighter. But clearer. I woke before dawn, sitting in the quiet kitchen with a notebook and a cup of stale coffee. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning Evermark's next quarter. I was planning mine. I started listing names. Cynthia, obviously. A few other clients I'd nurtured over the years. People who'd stuck with me not because of Evermark's logo, but because they trusted me. By noon, I had a list of 8 names. By 2, I'd added 5 more. Some of them I hadn't spoken to in years. But as I stared at the list, I realized something. Every name represented a bridge I'd built. And unlike Evermark, I never burned my bridges. Claire came into the kitchen as I was flipping through old contracts. Her hair tied back, sleeves rolled up. "You really doing this?" she asked, smiling. "I think I have to." She kissed the top of my head. "Then let's get to work." We spent the afternoon combing through every scrap of paperwork I'd kept over the years. Old proposals, contacts, client notes. Claire had always joked I was a hoarder when it came to work files. For once, it paid off. By dinner, the kitchen table was covered in folders, sticky notes, and legal pads. Claire poured us both a glass of wine and surveyed the chaos. "You know," she said, sipping, "it's like you're building something from the wreckage." I smiled faintly. That's all I've ever done. And then, as if the universe couldn't let me get too comfortable, my phone buzzed. A text. From Jason. "Hey Richard, hope you're well. Just a heads up, you signed a non-solicit when you renewed your exec contract last year. Legal might reach out if they hear you're poaching clients. Nothing personal. Just wanted you to know. Nothing personal." That phrase again. Like they all thought this was just a game. I stared at the message, feeling that old flicker of anger reignite. He thought I didn't remember? I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk and retrieved a thin blue folder. Inside was a copy of my contract. I flipped through the pages until I found it. The amendment I'd negotiated 2 years ago, back when Derek tried to cap my commissions. Clause 7b, non-solicitation restrictions shall not apply in the event of termination without cause. I exhaled. Without cause. They'd cut me loose without cause. Jason didn't know. Derek didn't know. But I knew. And that meant the bridges I built? I could walk across them any time I wanted. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept circling the same thought, over and over. They underestimated me. I sat in my home office at 2 a.m., contract spread open beside me, rereading that clause like it was a secret key. And in a way, it was. A key they never thought I'd use. By 7 a.m., I had my first coffee in hand and my phone opened to Cynthia's number. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down, the kind of moment that splinters a life into before and after. I tapped call. She picked up on the second ring. Richard. Yes. I swallowed. I've made a decision. A pause. Tell me. I'm going independent. The silence that followed wasn't hesitation. It was relief. Good, Cynthia said, her voice warm and firm. Very good. I was hoping you would. I could almost hear the smile in her words. I'll send you our contracts, she continued. We'd like to move everything under your new company as soon as possible. I blinked, stunned. You're sure? That fast? Richard, she said, I never signed with Evermark. I signed with you. I don't trust Jason. I don't trust Derek. We've been uneasy since the transition memo went out. I leaned back in my chair, letting her words settle like balm on a wound I hadn't realized was still open. Thank you, Cynthia. No, thank you. For once, we'll finally get to work with the person we wanted from the start, without the corporate noise. We wrapped the call. I sat staring at the phone, heart pounding. It was real. It was happening. Claire appeared in the doorway, holding her coffee. How'd it go? I looked at her, dazed but smiling. We have our first client. She grinned. Then you'd better come up with a name. A name. Funny, in 20 years, I'd never thought about what my name meant without Evermark after it. I turned it over in my mind as I stared out the window, sunlight breaking across the rooftops. Not Richard Mallory, VP. Not Richard Mallory, senior exec. Just Richard Mallory. And for the first time in decades, that felt like enough. The thing about starting something new at 55? It's exhilarating and terrifying. I spent the next few days deep in paperwork, phone calls, and quiet hours staring at blank legal forms. Claire sat beside me most evenings, sorting through old contacts, highlighting names, researching small business requirements. Every step felt like rebuilding a house from salvaged bricks. But the name stumped me. Mallory Consulting? Claire offered one night. Too plain, I said. What about Mallory and Partners? I don't have any partners yet. She grinned. Yet. I sat back, tapping my pen on the table. You know, it's not about me. It's about the bridges. She tilted her head. Bridges. That's what I've been thinking this whole time. It wasn't Evermark's logo that made people stay. It was the trust, the relationships, the connections I built and kept. She smiled softly. Then call it that. I blinked. Call it what? Bridges. I let the word sit in the air, tasting it, imagining it on letterhead, business cards, and email signature. Bridges Consulting. It felt right. Strong, simple, human. And in that moment, it was like every weight on my chest eased just a little. The next morning, I filed the paperwork. Bridges Consulting was official. I spent the day calling the names on my list, one by one. Some conversations were cautious. Others surprised me with their enthusiasm. A few had heard whispers about my departure and told me outright they'd been waiting for this moment. By the end of the day, I had verbal commitments from 5 accounts, including Cynthia's. It wasn't enough to replace my Evermark portfolio. Not yet. But it was a start. A real one. That evening, as I sat on the porch watching the streetlights flicker on, I heard a knock at the front door. Claire answered. Her voice startled. It's Jason. Jason? I stood slowly, heart tightening. What was he doing here? I stepped into the hallway. There he was, standing on my porch in his tailored jacket, holding a manila envelope, looking smug and uncomfortable all at once. Richard, he said, clearing his throat. I wanted to bring this in person. He handed me the envelope. Legal wanted me to deliver it directly. I opened it. Inside, a cease and desist letter, alleging breach of contract, violation of non-solicitation, potential litigation. I scanned it, then looked up at him. Nothing personal, he added, shrugging. There it was again. Nothing personal. I almost laughed. Tell Derek, I said quietly, to read the contract. Jason frowned. What? Clause 7b, I said. You might want to look it up. He stared at me blankly. I stepped back, closed the door gently in his face, and turned the lock. Claire watched me, brows raised. What was that? I smiled faintly. A bridge burning on their side, not mine. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't just reacting to life anymore. I was moving forward. Jason didn't come back after that night. But Derek? Oh, he wasn't done. The next morning, I woke to an email from Evermark's legal department. Formal, cold, thick with lawyer speak. They were reviewing the matter and reserving their right to pursue remedies. I closed the laptop without replying. Claire found me an hour later, standing in the yard, staring at the sky like it held answers. You okay? She asked. I'm fine, I said quietly. They're playing their hand. And it wasn't a strong one. Because that clause 7b, was airtight. I'd fought tooth and nail for it during contract renewal. Derek, eager to keep me from walking to a competitor back then, had agreed without reading the fine print. They couldn't stop me, but they could try to scare me. I spent the day setting up meetings. A lawyer friend of Claire's connected me with a small firm specializing in executive transitions. By noon, I had legal counsel on retainer. By 3, I had my LLC bank account open. By 5, my first client contract, Cynthia's, signed and filed. It was happening. Every step forward was a step away from Evermark's shadow. And yet, as night fell, I found myself back in the office, my home office now, staring at old Evermark photos. The launch parties. The team retreats. Photos of me standing beside CEOs who'd long since moved on, faces I'd once believed were my second family. Claire came in, holding 2 mugs of tea. She set one beside me. Memories. Yeah. I rubbed my jaw. Hard to believe I stayed so long. She sat across from me. You stayed because you believed. That's not weakness. I nodded slowly. I thought they were loyal. They were loyal, she said softly. Until someone new promised them something shinier. I sighed. I should have seen it. You did, she countered. Just later than you wanted. I sipped the tea. Funny. I used to think building something meant giving it everything. Now I realize it also means knowing when to walk away. Claire smiled gently. You're not walking away. You're walking toward. Outside, the porch light flickered on. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. And for the first time in weeks, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt full of possibility. The next morning, I woke to a knock. Not at the front door this time, at the side door, the one nobody ever used. Claire peeked through the curtain, frowning. It's Vanessa. Vanessa? From HR? I opened the door cautiously. She stood there, still in her office clothes, but with an uneasiness I'd never seen on her usually polished face. Can I come in? She asked quietly. I stepped aside. She walked into the kitchen and sat down at the table without waiting to be invited. She looked tired, worn, like someone who'd finally realized the machine she worked for wasn't a team but a treadmill. I shouldn't be here, she said after a long silence. I gathered. She rubbed her temples. They're going to come after you harder. I know. She looked up sharply. You're not fighting it? I am. Just not their way. Her lips twisted into something between a smile and a grimace. That's why I respected you, Richard. You never played the game their way. I sat down across from her. Why are you really here, Vanessa? She hesitated, then pulled a flash drive from her purse, setting it gently on the table. They're cooking the books. I froze. What? Derek. Jason. I've seen the reports. Deferred revenue. Phantom vendors. It's not just ego and power trips. They're setting up for a payout before the next merger. Gutting the company on paper so the buyout looks clean. I leaned back, processing. And you? I've been complicit, she admitted softly. But I'm done. And if you're really building your own, you deserve to know what's coming. I stared at the flash drive. Small. Ordinary. But it weighed as heavy as any sword. Why now? I asked quietly. She looked at me, exhaustion deep in her eyes. Because no one else will stand up. And because I've been watching you walk away. I realized I wanted out too. Claire placed a cup of coffee in front of Vanessa without a word. I closed my hand over the flash drive. This changes things, I murmured. Vanessa nodded. I hope so. Outside, the sun had risen. But somehow, the world felt darker. Not because I was afraid. Because now, I held something that could burn it all down. I sat in the dark, the flash drive on the desk beside me, the weight of it pulling every thought toward a choice I couldn't avoid. Claire stayed up with me, reading quietly in the chair across the room. Every so often, she'd glance over, as if checking to see whether I'd made up my mind. By dawn, I still hadn't. Because here's the thing, destroying Derek and Jason? That would be easy. The evidence Vanessa handed me wasn't just a smoking gun. It was a full artillery barrage. fraud, embezzlement, securities violations. The kind of crimes that don't just end careers, they end freedom. One call to the regulators and Evermark would unravel. And yet, the company I'd spent 20 years building would collapse too. Hundreds of jobs. People who had nothing to do with Derek's schemes. People who'd trusted me, who'd worked beside me, who'd believed in something bigger than two men's greed. Claire spoke softly into the silence. You don't have to carry this alone. I turned to her. But I do. Because if I use it, it won't just be them who fall. She set her book down. And if you don't? Then they get away with it. I stared out the window as the sun climbed over the rooftops. It wasn't justice that weighed on me. It was the collateral damage. And then I thought of something Vanessa had said. I've been complicit. I stood up suddenly, startling Claire. Maybe there's a third way. She watched me as I pulled out my phone and typed a message. Not to a regulator. Not to a reporter. To Cynthia. Need to talk. Urgent. She called within 5 minutes. I explained everything. The fraud. The flash drive. The risk. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said words I hadn't expected. You don't have to burn it down, Richard, she said softly. You just have to own it. Own it. Buy it. And in that moment, the path cleared in my mind. The buyout Derek and Jason were engineering? I'd seen the numbers. I knew the debt. The instability. With Cynthia's backing and the leverage of what I knew, I didn't have to destroy Evermark. I could take it back. When I hung up, Claire was still watching me. I smiled, for the first time in a long time. It's not over, I said quietly. She stood, crossed the room, wrapped her arms around me. No, she whispered. It's just beginning. And as the sun flooded the room, I realized something. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not revenge at all. It's rebuilding. Stronger. Wiser. And finally, under your own name.